no desire to live anywhere.
It's such a privilege to finally meet you in person.
My girls, that we've known each other 10 years, but never.
Yeah.
So they know.
What part of Canada are you in again?
Wow.
That's kind of. So I hear a lot about
Okay.
Well,
Couple hours.
couple hours.
So east, west, north?
They don't.
Yeah.
South. So I have nothing against
west.
like their.
Yeah.
Okay. So
So I head more down
Their
towards
style
Texas,
is
Detroit, and
Plains
Okay.
are very like
basically
we are doing a like.
Okay.
sorry.
Oh, she's like quizzing you?
Detroit. Yeah,
That sounds
great. Windsor's just on the other side. And it's about an hour and a half to Windsor, Detroit, to where we are, and then it's about an hour and a half up to Toronto. So a lot of people.
And so
A lot of people.
there's like the, I guess, really pessimistic way of people talking about politics about where it's like they pulled people are kind of like pretty good. They're a lot of times they're interested in growing.
when will the border finally open?
More like
No. A little bit of stuff.
So you have a lot of people who are both, but congregants. So it's like really common for people to go to Mount Vernon,
But it said on their menu, it was like,
be there for a couple of years and just like stop after church now. So like really faithful people. So yeah, I try to be like graceful, but we have like this ministerium of like 30 pastors in our area, and I stopped going because like people like every third or fourth meeting. How are you? Glad to be here. So I stopped going to
Taylor,
the
where are you working on right now for FYI? So I probably should know this, but I don't.
You just got.
I didn't realize
Talk us out of the
COVID kept Dana how many people.
Yeah, I don't mean to get on my phone.
Full-time job, trying to
I'm
organize
going
between
over-
classes
and
and everything going on here, and like my brain is
Yeah.
full already.
Some of the things that jumped out to me from their state of religion and mental health stuff for 2021, which is really good.
Yeah.
And then, but since labs have kind of been waiting for the next
You know,
thing.
you can tell it to organize. Yeah, so just like right click on your back.
You're gonna have some stuff with the labs 2.0.
Yeah, exciting.
Second version of that is gonna come out. Well, hopefully
No, wait.
99.9%.
Jeremy, I want to be official.
Perfect. I'm officially, I guess, I don't have a name.
Yeah.
Past cohort
Don't you
participants.
feel more organized, right?
I will say,
Good.
my computer is like the one area where.
Where
I'm like,
Where are they using?
I can do the rest of my life.
Yeah,
What was
I feel like I can consult my computer and not my child.
Yeah, I
My
did a
room is
little bit.
chaos. My desk work is chaos.
Helped Caleb a little bit with
My flat ain't clean, so I cook chicken, and that's a really good thing. Her cooking is terrible. So, yeah.
page settings type stuff. But yeah, I was doing another cohort group. We know we're just follow up on the same.
We are gonna do another cohort. Matter of fact, we're gonna probably like an hour earlier.
It's exciting. That's really cool.
It's gonna probably like Houston, but because we have those games down.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't sleep well.
Jeremy, I have to
I think
say, I
they're
like
Eric, you're gonna try
I
to
think they're gonna
place
be
it
good
up.
Pasadena.
I was like, how do you do that?
be like a
Yeah.
font creator.
I
I wanted to be like really readable from across the room, just in case.
That's great.
Get, at least we have some context.
Oh, wow, pleaseable.
Yeah.
So I don't know what this means for this tickets. This is an RSVP, which means first come, first served. The RSVP does not guarantee a seat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some people I feel like that's really well, but I
It's a documentary about
I've been reading your
like
part.
I've
shop owner deal.
I've really enjoyed it.
Take it back.
you know, when I
But it's
started, I was
the-
nervous.
What is it? What did they say?
RSVP, which means first come, first serve, does not guarantee a seat. It's kind of like, it was like on my phone, like on the fence about going. I don't want to stand in line for like 3 hours to get in.
I want to know how many if they want to write stuff that's going to still.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a good content.
say, hey,
We did too. Yeah, when I was in school. We had to do cursive for like 3 years.
I didn't
And
know.
they always.
It's funny sitting in Toronto, the large, talking extensively.
Never use it.
Connect out. Screen with sleep, but just every email wakes it up.
Sure.
We do childcare for this overheating on Saturday? Ah, what?
I didn't know.
He's not at church, but like was doing all this stuff with disability, right? Man, that was like with should be like.
School computer lab.
Yeah.
looks like everybody came back this morning.
I remember very furious.
Well, not everybody.
Oh,
Still
really?
missing a few.
Yeah.
We're missing a couple that's wandering in, I guess.
We were talking
Okay,
about.
hopefully
And
the
I'm
traffic.
curious if
I guess it's either
Whatever
traffic
relocated, there's
or
one
they're at the coffee place. There they are. There they are. Look at that.
It's like Revelation.
I was-
I know one thing.
We're waving at each other.
I know.
All right, you noticed something, I think.
Oh, like the recent trip? No, I.
No, we're planning. Our families are close.
That's what we were talking about.
They're down.
My friend is actually in the area, like,
Oh,
45, planted there, so.
Yeah, we're good. Then we were all like.
No, we brought our own.
I'm like,
Morning, he's wonderful.
Wow.
Yes.
It's funny.
Early in the morning. I just took like was on it.
So.
Yeah,
you-
like, I'm not great. I just, yeah. I didn't need to go to that class. I could just give them a full transcript.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
Morning.
I can tell you're totally youth pastors, you're like sitting in different places, like mixing it up. I mean, except for Dave, it's always one. No
You have to
joke.
drink it.
Uh,
Part of being.
Great to
30
have you
minutes late.
back. I hope you got some rest last night. It was great to have you over. It was good. Place looked more trash this morning than it did last night.
Because of Andy?
Yeah, well, you know.
All those brownies.
Yeah, right. So,
We had a party after the party.
I
knew
it.
Those brownies.
I mean, even though we're kind of up, you know, where we are, if you notice, like the neighbors are really close. It's just like, it gets pretty loud, but they're all pretty good. So there's one guy named Arnold up there. He's 85. He's lived there for 50 years. And he told me yesterday, it's like, well, first of all, he complains about the yard. I'm never doing something right. But then we always have a nice conversation. He's like, I'm 85 because I'm gonna live 20 more years. I'm gonna live to 105, and I want to be your neighbor that whole time. That's like, Arnold, so do I. Really sweet. So yeah, and then his daughter comes down and always apologizes for Arnold because Arnold's always complaining about my yard. But you know, that's neighbors. So last night we had a rager, so I'm sure I'll be hearing from Arnold. tonight.
That's right.
So thank you.
Yeah, Thursday's coming.
I didn't know there was a
competition.
Oh, yeah. It'll take it to a new level. Maybe we'll invite Arnold. He's probably-
Yes.
Why not?
So we got a super exciting day today. Lots to go on. We're gonna start out with a reflection from Andy in just a second, which I'm super excited about. And then we have my friend and colleague, Dr. Jos de Kock, who is piping in from Belgium. And so he's written a really interesting piece that he presented at the International Association for the Study of Youth Ministry, IAM. We met in Atlanta this last summer. And he wrote something called Spiritual Maturity, a literature review of desired outcomes for youth ministry. So they've done this massive sort of research on, well, what do we mean by spiritual maturity? How do we talk about that? And I think this came up a little bit yesterday, this idea of formation. So I have also connected his piece, his paper, there's a link in Canvas that you get access. You don't need to have it for today, but But we're excited to have him, and he'll present. I got to present his team in January, so we kind of have like this little international thing going. I don't know, it's like a little love fest or whatever, but it's really, really great. We'll take some time to process Joss when he's done, which will finish up about 11. We'll try to have a break in there too. I'll try to do that. And then around 11:45-ish, we're gonna have a FYI sponsored lunch outside in the courtyard over here. It's gonna be great. And we want to pick your brain on some things, but thank you to Andy and FYI for hosting this. And so we're really glad to do that. This afternoon, Andy's going to talk about final papers. I know that he's already talked to some of you already about that, but he's got some things to say. We'll take a break, and then I want to talk a little bit about our new project that we're doing at FYI and Emerging Adults, and share with you some of our initial findings that are not published yet. But I'm eager to share them with you and kind of get your feedback on that. So we got a fun day today. And
It's really good
excited
stuff.
about it. And so without further ado, Andy John.
Hey guys, thank you. So you guys realize you're in an elite club, right? If you think about it, there's not that many. Well, you will be in an elite club. I guess I should say that. We hope that all of you will be at the end of this journey of D-Men. In that there's not that many people that have a doctorate of ministry specifically focused on next generation, right? I mean, what, 500 of us, maybe 1,000? I don't know exactly what number that might be. But if you think about of all the youth leaders across the country, around the world, we literally are just a small club group of leaders who have really sought after the academic piece along with the practical side of ministry. While we're doing ministry with young people, you guys are also seeking out all the academic learnings that you can get, which is fairly unique. It's fairly unique because let's face it, youth pastors have a reputation of flying by the seat of their pants, not really caring about all the details, and just wanting to hang out with students, and that's the level of ministry. And so you guys obviously understand much more than that. And one of the things that Steve has talked about, and I want to reinforce, is that you all have something to say in the field of youth ministry or in field of young adults. You all will have the platforms. If you don't now, you will have platforms where you get to speak into other people's lives, other people's ministries. I had no idea when I was going through the Doctor of Ministry program that where that would lead to. I would have never dreamed that I would be sitting here with you all first, but then having the opportunity to be on the team with FYI and getting to train and lead youth leaders and pastors all across the country and around the world. I would have never have dreamt that, but here we are. So I wonder where God is going to be leading you guys, and what you're going to bring to the conversation of the next generation, right, of young people, and how you're going to be speaking into that. And of course, I mean, the final project, we'll talk a little bit about that this afternoon, but I'll remind you of this afternoon, is that that's not your final writing, right? That's not going to be your final thing that you'll ever say about youth ministry or young people. It's just the next thing you're going to be writing for some of you in the year 3, and others of you will get there, right? But having said all that, one of the things that we also have to remember is that that the only way that we get to have the voice in the platform is if we realize that we don't know a whole lot. Even after this journey, even as experts in youth ministry, that we need to submit ourselves under the leadership of Christ, right? That it is about serving Christ, and it is about serving those that we come into contact with, right? So I want you to listen to one of my favorite passages, Philippians 2. Hopefully that's familiar to you. Because it just is a reminder for me that it is about service of others, that we get to sit around this table and have conversations that we get to have conversations about. So listen to these words from Philippians chapter 2. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should not look only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. That Jesus would submit himself in service for others. And I think that's just a reminder for us that that's what God has called us to do. I wonder, as we know that we're kind of here in a bubble this week. I heard one of you guys talking about how weird it is to not have other responsibilities, that you can really just focus on being here. But we also realize that there's a lot of stuff going on at home, wherever home may be for you. And you carry all that stuff with you. So I want us to have a few moments of silence for us to talk to God ourselves, and then I'll close us with a verbal prayer. God, it is a privilege to be around this table once again with these friends who have such passion for you and for young people. And it's inspiring to me to get to hang out and to learn about their stories and their ministry contexts and their hopes and dreams. God, I give you thanks for that opportunity and that privilege. And it is a privilege to grow and to learn and to to be a part of this doctorate of ministry journey. And God, it is a privilege to have the platforms that we do have today of caring for teenagers, caring for young adults, leading other youth leaders in the spaces that we have. And God, we know that there may be other opportunities in the future of maybe even a time where we can impact greater numbers. But Father, we come humbly today, reminded of the sacrifice that your son Jesus made for us, reminded of the posture that he took. And may we take that same posture today as we learn from others, as we learn from each other. And God, that we are humbled by what you're doing in other people's lives, in the way that you're working in our own lives. So God, we give you thanks. Thanks for this morning, and thanks for all that we will experience today. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it. Looking forward to hearing from you throughout the day today. I appreciate you, B. It's been great to see you. Great. So now we're in that moment where Joss is coming out in 10 minutes. So we've got a little bit of time. So let me just give you a little bit of background on Joss, and then we're just gonna have to wait until he types in. So it should be soon. All set up.
Steve, is he logging into this meeting
Yes.
ID?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I think we'll be fine. I just checked with tech to make sure that he can share his screen. So I think that was my biggest concern. So I think we're good. So Joss is, he's at the Faculty of Evangelical Theology. It's called ETF in Belgium. And he's there, the professor of department chair of practical theology. He's also the rector there, and he's coordinator of Master of Teaching program. So obviously they're a smaller school than say Fuller, but he does a lot of collaborative work within the region, Netherlands, Belgium, other places as well. And he's a pretty thoughtful guy. And I think what I've appreciated about him is I think that the work he's doing is significant work. And I think it's good for us sometimes, especially for those of us that come from an American context, we're really used to kind of having a lot of data and resourcing fit our context. And our international brothers and sisters here have had to do a lot of transposing over the last couple of years, and which I really appreciated. And I've been very, very grateful when they reach out to me saying, not sure this book's going to work. Can we replace it for something else? So I feel like you all taught me along the way as well. So I think it's nice sometimes to kind of hear something from another perspective, like what are they wrestling with, what literature are they drawing from? Because I think it does two things. One is it forces, especially those from an American context, to have to not be the center of the universe and actually transpose. But also I think it evokes our imagination to realize that there's lots of interesting conversations happening around the world that perhaps can evoke our own imaginations as we think about the ministry and the work that we're doing in our context as well, right? So it's not going to be an easy, like, well, whatever Josh says must apply to us, because a lot of us are going to go, well, that's in Belgium, that's not here. Well, welcome to the rest of the world's world as far as like what FYI pumps out or whatever, right? So at FYI, we're really sensitive to that. Like a lot of times people are like, hey, can you come to Indonesia or China or other places around the world and do stuff? And we're like, well, maybe, but why would you want us? Like, what actually do we have to offer you based on our very bound research and our very unique focus of North America? I've even had conversations with Canadians, like, is this okay? And, and Canadians are way too nice to tell me otherwise, but generally there's like some things that connect, but there's a lot of things and assumptions that are really different, right? So as we think about context, we think about it within our unique context specifically, but I think as we look at literature as well, we have that as well. But I think Josh is a gracious man. He's got some great things to say. His presentation at the conference that I was at in Atlanta was remarkable, and I just thought it'd be great to share him with you and sort of leverage the relationship that he and I have, which is really, really cool. So anyway, I'll say more when he comes on, but I just wanted to give you that background. I would love for you all to do what you did yesterday with each other, if you can. Think about what you liked, and maybe something you wonder about his work, right? I think if we can engage him and let him just sort of riff a little bit, I think that would be really great. Obviously, we're not going to have time for everybody to do it, so I'm not making you do it. But I think if you can have that in your head, I think he'll enjoy the conversation as well. So just keep that in the back. So.
Hey, Steve, just technical question.
Yeah.
I don't know what the meeting ID is. I can't tell because of the icons that are there.
Yes.
But the link that you have on Canvas is your personal room.
Really?
Yeah.
Enjoy yourselves.
Yeah, take a break. Yeah, bag of brownies are in the back over here.
Derek. Me? Is that your name? No? Okay. Drew Derek. So my legal name is Derek. Okay. But everyone calls me Drew. But those who don't know me well enough, like Andy calls me Derek on my annotated bibliography, so I know better. And it's funny because I knew it wasn't Steve that was on my annotated bibliography just from the moment it said Derek. I was like, it's Andy.
You totally
But my nickname, never mind.
There he is.
Less about me, more about him.
Oh, I did it right. I'm so. So, Joss, can you hear us? Oh.
We can't see you.
Okay, I can hear you. I was muted. Yes.
Oh, it's so good. You look great on the big screen. I'll send you a picture. How are you? Can you see me okay? I can't tell you. Oh, yeah.
I feel much better now.
Oh, I do too. Yes, I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to connect you, but it's great. And what time is it for you right now?
It's 6:30 p.m. Yeah.
Oh, you had a full day already. So
yes.
but tomorrow's coming, so we can rest in that. It's great to see you. I think we could go ahead and start. Are we good? Yeah, that'd be great. So I just can't tell if you can see me. I'm just going to come over
Look at the image.
So great to have you with us. Thank you so much for your graciousness in being here. I've already told the class a little bit about your role at the school in Belgium. I'm happy for you to share more if you'd like. But I just wanted to say thank you for joining our class. I think what I appreciate about you is your collegiality. The honor that you gave me to come and speak to your group at the beginning of the year was great, and I'm really thankful that you're able to join our group. This is the group. These are all our doctoral students at Fuller. There's about 25 of us here, mostly from the States, but we also have Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and yeah, I think they're good. In China, I suppose, would I be fair saying to say that as well? So we have a little bit of an international flavor as well. No one from Belgium yet, though, but you are certainly welcome to send students our way.
There you go.
So yeah, so thank you. And without further ado, I'll pass it off to you, and you can make your remarks. And you should be able to share a screen if you need to. So let's make sure that works as well.
Okay, I will look for that. And it's correct that there's no one connected online like me. So every participant is in the room now.
Yeah, we're all in the room.
Okay. Okay, let's see if I can share. So yeah, well, hello everybody. Yes, it's an honor for me to be invited to you. It's always awkward to be with you on a large screen. But I suppose it looks very great. Yes, so that's yeah, I believe that. I will share my screen now. This one. Okay, so this is the main topic for today. It was already on the slide. At least I saw this slide. Spiritual maturity, a literature review on desired outcomes in youth ministry. But let me first start with shortly introducing myself. And it was totally true what was on the introduction slide. So that was me, both the photograph and the information. Jos de Kock, my name. President of Evangelische Theologische Faculteit in Leuven, Belgium. I will send Professor Steve Arkin some personal information and contact details by email, so he can share it with you. I'm a president of our faculty and full professor of practical theology, and I chair our department of practical theology here. And my own specializations are in youth ministry and religious education and theological education. And besides, I also coordinate the Research Center for the Study of Religious Education and Youth Ministry. And for those of you who do not know our institute, a very brief introduction to you. So where am I at the moment? Well, actually, I'm at home at the moment, but it takes me a 30 minutes bike to my faculty here in Leuven. Let's see. So here's just one picture of our beautiful city here in Leuven, or Louvain, as the French say. Leuven is the oldest university city in the Benelux. And the Catholic University in Leuven, which is world famous, that's our big brother. It's the elephant. We are not, well, we are even not a mouse, but that's our big brother, the Catholic University. We, as an evangelical and evangelische theological faculty, are an independent Protestant theological faculty. And we are located in the same beautiful city here. Well, the Dutch word is evangelisch. Well, a literal translation is evangelical, but this stands in our context for a broad Protestant evangelical identity covering a wide range of church traditions and free church movements. So we are situated here in the very heart of Europe. So here you can see it's just near Brussels. It takes you 20 minutes drive from here. So it's really in the heart of Europe. There are we located, and this is our beautiful campus. And these are the programs, so just for your information. So our bachelor program is a Dutch program, but our master program and our doctoral PhD program are international programs. And they are in theology and religious studies. And this is typical for our faculty, where we have this classical theological training, and we combine this training with one of the departments, actually, of religious studies and missiology. Furthermore, we have a Master of Teaching Religion, which is a Dutch program, and this is typically for people who want to become a teacher of religion in secondary schools in Flanders, in Belgium. And well, these are the numbers. So we have about 235 students enrolled at the moment. We are an international faculty, so we have a lot of network cooperate. A lot of institutes in our network from other countries. So just some pictures, our offices, some nice colleagues. This is our chapel at the very heart of our faculty. Our library, many books, you know, that's the library. And well, this is the most, not only the most funniest thing, but also the most important thing, to come together and to share life and studies together at our barbecue in this regard. So as I said, I coordinate the Institute for the Study of Religious Education and Youth Ministry. And well, actually, this is, let's see, I can move here. So, well, this is in short what we do. We try to provide evidence-based resources in a network for mutual learning and theological reflection. And This is, in other words, what we are doing. We provide an up-to-date knowledge and views for churches and teachers of religion that help them to strengthen the faith formation of the next generation. So that's what we try to do in our research institute. We focus on academic research, on practices of youth ministry and religious education. And at the same time, we provide space for cooperative learning with professionals and professional organizations in the fields of religious education and youth ministry. And that brings me to our main topic of today, which is spiritual maturity. And what is spiritual maturity about? And what I will do this, well, at least for me, this is evening. For you, it's in the morning. It's quite early in the morning. It is about 9 o'clock? 9:30?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, well, that's quite, okay, that's quite early.
Yeah.
And so, and well, I will base it on a literature review. And I know from Professor Arky that he shared already a paper I presented a couple of months ago in Atlanta on the same topic. So this will be the basis for this lecture. So I will unpack a little bit what is in there. And of course, we have time together now also to reflect a little bit on the contents and also to ask questions and to discuss with each other. And well, let's start with a short discussion. And this is my first question just before starting lecturing about the main topic. So the main question of today is, how would you define spiritual maturity? How would you define Christian maturity? What is your understanding of these concepts? And another question is, what is in your context the main purpose of youth ministry? And probably there is not such as a main purpose, but what do you observe in practice as a main purpose in youth ministry contexts? Well, Steve, what can we do? So you cannot react in the chat. So you can have a little group discussion. So I can give you 5 minutes to discuss with the 2 of you or the 3 of you together. And then we should look for a means to bring your input to me. So but that we can succeed with that. So can I give you 5 minutes to in little groups, 2 or 3 of you together to reflect a little bit on these questions. So what would you define as spiritual maturity or Christian maturity? And the other question is, what do you observe as a main purpose in youth ministry practices in your own context? I do not see you anymore.
You're so integrated in your
I think that one of us, I think that's good.
Right, like
You are giving me that chapter.
No, I think I read it in already in the context of Christianity.
I think that's right.
Yeah, but if you take it out of context, sure, I'm
I think that you can have spiritual maturity. Like looking at people who already have like a developed sense of like there's something under here, and so I'm trying to figure out
yeah, but once you're
Booted us out.
Oh, okay. Then you got it recorded?
Yeah.
No, but
I mean,
Yeah,
I
it's
didn't
good,
know
yeah.
there's within the context of data management, but
I think that there's a sense that like there's religious interpretation, behavior modification. I know that like when you ask the Bible question, I can tell you right and spiritual maturity is that there's like a sense of like God comes in the midst of our thinking. He says like Christ offers us a way.
it's just kind of that's like I don't agree with that. Like I think that somebody who's like attending, serving, giving, and the community, I think like I listen at that doesn't have the maturity of Christian life. So for me, both of those terms within the Christian context doesn't what where are you on your path to sanctification? Are you progressing or moving backward? So Christian maturity or spiritual maturity in the context of that is where oh the
Build them up. Build them back down. Build them back up. Build them back up.
I care about you.
It's always have a desire to.
So they no, I understand. I don't think it's necessarily a linear path. Just like I don't.
Work with them.
Everybody, that type of thing. But if I'm looking at how you're living your life.
We really know what's happening there. Right.
What were the metrics?
And the purpose
So,
here as well.
yeah.
Someone
So that
What resonates with them over there?
in my content, it's like
so many of them.
my denomination.
So like,
Yeah, I guess let's say that that's sort of
I think right now,
when most
I can't either.
I believe with some people, yeah, I'm all about that. Some people are like,
You know how to get us back together.
or whatever. And so, let's say that someone,
All right, about 1 more minute.
I was pushed away from Christ.
you can't even realize this.
Compared to
All of our content
person B, who is also not a believer, but is doesn't to that because like they have like a strong focus on like I want to like make life better, and it's with like grace and love.
I do that.
Because they don't see on the other side of the pond, right?
That person was spiritual.
So, West Centric.
Yeah, right. Which is right, our focus.
I know the way that you're describing
All right, about 20 more seconds. Just try to bring it to a close. Or at least a comma.
You're only step 2 kind of thing. And so I guess my
I didn't so I can't, I'm not gonna compare.
Yep, good that they're engaging in the conversation.
Bringing it down. Put a little comma on what you said. Sounds great. Joss, you asked some good questions. There's a lot of talking happening over here. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And the most exhausting intervention at moments like this is please share some ideas from your group to the whole, to the larger group. That's the most exhausting thing to do now. So I will do it. I don't do it, So I will not ask you to just share your ideas, The only thing I ask you is to keep reflective, like you was a couple of minutes ago during the last 5 minutes, and to think about what your answers were, or what you heard other ones' answers were to these kinds of questions. And please try to connect these answers to what we will see in the lecture from now on. I will share my screen again. So here we are. So these are the questions. So you reflected a little bit on your own answers, on the answers from your colleagues. And now I will present some insights from this literature review. And to the left, you see the literature review, the document as you got it. And in the meantime, it's quite a lengthy piece of work. So this piece of work will be published in the Journal of Human Theology in 2 parts. And well, I was kind of creative in finding 2 different titles. So the first one is Developments Towards Maturity, a literature review on desired outcomes in youth ministry, part 1. And then, it took me some days, and then I came up with the idea to make it part 2 for the next one. Yeah? So it will be published. It will be published somewhere in 2023 or 4 or something like that. But the backgrounds so why doing such a literature review at all? Now, of course, I'm enthusiastic about religious education, youth ministry, and so that's how it, that's how it works. But at the same time, the question of purpose or ideal, or the main reason why to do things in life, and why in particular to be involved and engaged with young people in church ministry, that's quite an important question. And probably you observed the importance of the question when you had this little reflection of 5 minutes with your colleagues. And what I observe is a variety of self-reported goals from youth ministers. So that's the first observation, and probably that was also your observation when discussing with your colleagues. But at the same time, there's also a variety of goals, aims, purposes as shared in academic accounts on youth ministry. So this is a double observation. So both in practices and in the academic debates, there's a wide range of goals mentioned, reflected on, and also how do you call it? Taken as, some colleagues are really missionaries in saying, well, this is the real purpose in youth ministry, not only in youth ministry literature, in the small sense of the word, but also in the literature on religious education, in the broader sense, and also in the literature of spiritual formation. And this is not without reason I mentioned these 3 areas, so youth ministry, religious education, and this branch of literature on spiritual formation. And sometimes these branches of literature and academic works are closely knitted, but sometimes they are really 3 different parts of the world and parts of the academic world. And what I did in the literature review, I had a look on the 3 branches as mentioned here. And then so this is just talking about the pathway I was on during the last years. And then I also observed this concept of spiritual maturity, because sometimes in this literature, this word maturity, to become a mature adult, mature Christian, pops up. And then it's also not clear at all what is meant with spiritual maturity. At least it is clear for the one author, but this doesn't correspond in a way with what is the understanding of spiritual maturity of another author. And let alone this concept of Christian maturity. So there's a lot of diversity, complexity in these concepts of goals, purposes, and maturity. So here is where the role of the academic researcher starts. And then the main question is, what are the main categories of desired outcomes in youth ministry practices? And how can these appropriately be classified in a theoretical framework? So I must admit that, you know, this is something I really like to do, to put things together in a framework that's in some way helpful. Helpful to get the overview and helpful to make choices from now on. So that's why I did this exercise of reviewing the literature with this question on the table. So can we come up with a kind of framework that categorizes all these possibilities in an insightful way, and that's at the same time helpful for youth ministers and scholars to take the next step. So as a method, it's a literature review. I will present the outcomes of a literature review with you. And the review was based on all scholarly works in peer-reviewed journals regarding the subjects, published from 96 to 21. And this is quite important to be aware of. So I took a time span of 96 to 21. So that's 25 years. So the most recent 25 years. And I had a look in scholarly works in peer-reviewed journals. So I didn't have a look in the first place in monographs or in all kinds of professional writings in all kinds of journals. This was my focus. And then in the procedure, there were 3 steps. So what I will present to you is not only the results of the review, but also the, the strategy. So I hope this is also insightful for you if you are in the position to conduct a literature review in your studies or after your studies. Then this is something to well, that might be helpful to do it in a structured way. And the structure begins with this is my focus in terms of the time scale, and this is my focus in terms of the sources, and then the work begins. My first step was actually I took 2 chapters from the academic handbook in youth ministry research, and that's a handbook which is in press, and this will be published at the end of this year, so in 2022. And why I took these 2 chapters, this is the book, The 5 Questions. It will be published by Whitford Stock, by Pickwick Publications, and I wrote it together with my Norwegian colleague Bart Norheim. Just to give you a glimpse of the handbook, 5 questions, and this is really a wonderful handbook on what we found out in academic research on youth ministry in the past 20-25 years. And the first question in the handbook is, who are the youth in youth ministry? What do we know actually about youth and youth ministry? The second question is really a challenging one. Where is God in youth ministry? The third one has to do with the purpose of youth ministry. The fourth with the youth minister in youth ministry. And then the 5th one is how to research practices in youth ministry. But as you can see, part 3 is about what is the purpose of youth ministry. And what I did for this handbook is actually a literature review on purposes in youth ministry literature, but I only based this on publications in the Journal of Youth and Theology and the journal Religious Education. For particular reasons. So it was a really condensed and limited review with an eye on this book publication. But this first step, taking these 2 chapters as a starting point, that resulted in a first gathering of relevant publications, but also, and that's quite important, to gather some keywords to search for, So keywords like purposes, aims, maturity, these kinds of keywords. Then the second step was this systematic literature review in 4 databases. And this is really a practical tip. And for you, you can use these databases for many purposes in your studies on the cutting edge of theology, pedagogics, education, and psychology. ATLA, which is the theological database, as you probably know, and then the APA for the psychological writings, ERIC for the educational ones, and the Web of Science is a broad social science database. And why is it important to show you these databases? And the importance is this, that there is a lot of really good resources for reflection on this question of purposes in youth ministry. And these works are not only published exclusively in theological oriented journals. Sometimes you find really relevant contributions in all kinds of other journals in other disciplines. So that's also that's the reason why I present these databases for you, to be aware of a world beyond theology and religious education and youth ministry, where we sometimes find really relevant resources for our understanding. Well, then the third step is, of course, an initial screening of the articles I found, reviewing them, the abstracts in the first instance, and then going into the main arguments in the articles. And that resulted in a selection of 50 journal articles included in the review. And you find a list of all these 50 journal articles at the end of the paper, which was handed over to you. But then the question is, of course, how to analyze all these nice articles and how present the results. And this is a summary, and this picture is also in the paper. This is a picture summarizing the results. And well, to explain this summary a little bit, it appeared that most youth ministry goals I found in the literature can be located in one of the following 3 areas, and these are listed there. So the area of spiritual development on the very left side, in the middle the area of personal development, and then the area of social development on the right side. So we will delve into a little bit deeper into the subheadings within these 3 categories. But in addition, I had 2 particular observations while analyzing the literature. And I will start with these 2 observations in a minute. And the first one was that there were 2 perspectives on how to understand the relationship between spiritual development as one area, on the one hand, to the 2 other areas of personal development and social development. So how do these 3 areas of development relate to each other? So I observed 2 perspectives, and I will explain these 2 perspectives in a minute. And the second observation has to do with the bottom of this figure, where you see individual development and communal development. This was a general observation that for all these categories of goals, sometimes the focus of the author or the article was on individual development of individual young people, and sometimes the focus was more on communal development. So the very aim was not the individual development of young people, but the very aim also of youth ministry practices was to develop the community of which the youngster was part of. So first, this first observation. So what are the 2 perspectives I observed? And And that's the reason why you see these arrows here. So, and the question here is spiritual development to be understood as human development in the broad sense? Or should spiritual development be understood as a particular area of human development next to personal development and social development? So this first perspective is about the juxtaposition. And well, here it is called the first perspective, but I'm aware that it was the latter one I just presented. So as a first perspective, we see a juxtaposition between spiritual development, personal development, and social development. Although in this perspective, it is acknowledged that spiritual development is interconnected with personal and social development, one can envision spiritual development on its own. So this isolation of spiritual development from other areas of development has to do with the religious source of spiritual development, namely belief in God, transcendence, or a divine being. So this is a fundamental observation. This first perspective, often found in the literature, is saying, well, although spiritual development is interconnected with personal and social development, one can envision spiritual development on its own. So if we speak about spiritual development in relationship with youth ministry practices, then we can speak of spiritual development on its own, isolated from personal development and social development. And this has to do with a particular source for that development process. And this is God himself. It's about transcendence, or it is about a divine being. And this is true for spiritual development, and this is not the case for personal and social development. Then a second perspective we can observe in the literature is that it envisions spiritual development as an all-encompassing dimension of human development. And this means that spiritual development purposes should be understood holistically. So if spiritual development is the very goal of youth ministry, then youth ministry practices, by consequence, aim at human development in the broader sense, that is, bringing all areas of human development under the umbrella of spiritual development. So probably this was also reflected in your discussions, this second perspective. Probably the first perspective was observed in your reflection at the beginning of this session. Probably you had a debate on this question. It's also possible. But this second perspective teaches us, well, spiritual development is, in a sense, human development in the broader sense. So you cannot think about spiritual development decoupled from personal and social development and the other way around. And in practice, this means that a youth minister might say, well, youth ministry is about everything, you know. It's not just isolated in something called spiritual development or faith development or something like that. It's about human development. My task is to help people grow in a general sense of the word, you know. So that this is that's really a reflection of this second perspective. Then this second observation while reviewing the literature, and this has to do with this focus on individual development or so a communal development. Youth ministry purposes can have different beds. So there is this bed, so think of a bed of a river. So the bed of individual development of young people is one bed, and there is another bed, the bed of communal development of the faith community. And if youth ministry is like a river, you know, then the river can go along the one bed more than the other. It can take a position in the middle, you know, but there is a difference in focus. And that's also evident when you read the literature. I observe that most all for youth ministry purposes are put forward as purposes of individual development, most often found in the literature. But also if I talk with youth ministers. And this has to do with things like understanding yourself, applying basic teaching in your own life, becoming a whole person, coming to a personal faith, and so on and so on. So this focus on the individual, the personal, you know, it's a kind of inward looking. Ah, well, it's here. Yes. So most often youth ministry purposes are put forward as purposes of individual development of individual young people. Some literature is more concerned about youth ministry purposes put forward as purposes of communal development of the church or the faith community. So it is there in the literature, but it's a minority. Well, let's have a look at these three different areas of development. And we start with this area of spiritual development. It's not that sharp, this projection, but well, let's do it with this. I hope you can read it. So spiritual development is a particular area of human development. And here you see the main categories. What you find in the literature are purposes in terms of faith. Identity, being in Christ, Christ-likeness, discipleship, and spiritual growth. For spiritual growth, there's a purpose. You see reflections on different dimensions of growth: cognitive, the affective dimension, volitional, emotional, social, etc. And also this division between the vertical dimension of growth, the relationship with the divine, and this horizontal dimension, so growth in terms of growth among people. So just to give you some examples from the literature on purposes of faith. So you read about the purpose of youth ministry is having complete ownership, so helping young people to have complete ownership of their faith and intentionally integrate spiritual practices into their lives. So here you see literally the word faith in this example. And this is a typical example of a purpose in youth ministry in the area of spiritual development in terms of faith. It has to do in youth ministry, we are directing towards young people getting this ownership of their faith. If you look at this word of identity, then you find readings like this. We help young people finding their identity in terms of who they are in Christ. So this identity category often has to do with this concept of being in Christ. So youth ministry is not about acquiring knowledge or to have a good time together or something like that. It has to do with being in the first place, and then in particular a being that can be envisioned as a being in Christ. Christ-likeness is often found as a concept in the literature. Here's an example. We hope or we strive that the young people, grow to think more like Christ, develop emotions or attitudes more like Christ, and behave more like Christ. This is an author who's really directed towards Christ-likeness. So not only to think more like Christ, but also have these attitudes more like Christ and to behave more like Christ. Christ-likeness. Discipleship. A kind of a container concept, often be used in many writings. And this is about to help the young to accept life in its totality as both gift and duty and live it well. So these examples are not examples from my own writings in the paper, but these are examples from the literature reviewed, to be clear on that. So this is one author who states, well, it has to do with helping young people to accept life in its totality as both gift and duty and live it well. And from the context of this this quote, it is clear that it has to do with this discipleship thing. Then spiritual growth. Well, this is very interesting to see. So there is a lot of spirituality as a concept in all these writings. And what is really helpful is this division between what is called anthropological dimensions. So these different dimensions of human life, cognitive dimension, affective dimension, the volitional thing, the corporeal thing, actions, practices, emotional experiences, beliefs, and social. And well, this is, for me, this is really crucial, this division, because we often, not only as academic teachers in theological departments, but also as youth ministers, we often think about these anthropological dimensions in terms of, okay, this is how it works. So this is reality. We know that we not only are, bound up in our head, we are more than what we think. We are as human beings, as we are, because of our body, because of our emotions, because of what we are doing. But another thing is to say, well, that means in terms of purposes, that we should also choose purposes in all these areas, you know. And so this is really helpful to think about, okay, what might be relevant purposes in youth ministry in the area of the social dimension, in the area of the emotional dimension, in the area of the body. Yeah. Well, here's just an example from the cognitive dimension. That means that spiritual growth has to do with this. Well, acquiring a secure knowledge of the basic teachings of the faith. Yeah. But just to give you an example, not from the literature, but just from practice, you know, something like to have an experience of God, to have an experience of love, you know, or of an experience of being accepted. So this whole thing of experience can also be put forward in terms of a purpose. Yeah. And then this typical division between a vertical and horizontal dimension. And this is often put forward in the literature. So on the one hand, there is this developing a relationship with Christ. And on the other hand, there is this spiritual maturity as a concept expressed by developed relationships with others. And here the literature really differs, because some of you might say, well, I cannot think about the vertical dimension without the horizontal dimension, or I cannot envision the horizontal dimension without the vertical dimension. But you can find examples in the literature that there is really an accent on one and not on the other. And even literature saying, well, the vertical dimension, you know, that's the big thing. That's the only important thing. And the horizontal dimension is just a secondary thing. Yeah. So you find different views on this whole division. Well, then have a look on the personal development area. And this is a category which is about purposes of self-understanding, reflectiveness, integrity, self-awareness, identity, dignity and justice, moral and not ethical thinking. And here I put some examples of some screenshots from the literature. Let there be lights. Okay, here it's becoming evening here. I hope you can see me again. Yeah. So this is about a personal development, and you see here, well, an example of Reginald Blount on homemaking. So the concept of being a whole person is really reflected on in this article. And the other example is from Dolores Carpenter, which presents 15 goals. Well, 15 goals for African American professional education. So here are 15 goals already. Well, and that's an interesting read, because Carpenter distinguishes between different dimensions of Christian educational goals, and in particular, two dimensions are relevant in this regard. Carpenter refers to purposes in the area of identity and dignity and social justice, and also in the area of interpreting life and moral ethical thinking. And morality and ethics are parts of personal development that are also hinted at by Bobbert, another author, who analyzes the concept of justice in a Christian context and distinguishes dimensions in the personal domain and the social domain. But here the key word is justice. And justice is justice and integrity. And these are connected with this ethical thinking, is really existent in the literature as a key purpose in youth ministry, to work with each other around this concept of justice, to do justice, to be justice, to live out justice. And this means a life of integrity and also teaching in ethics. So that's really interesting to observe. And then there's this third area of social development. And here it's about social connectedness, to build trusting relationships in youth ministry. Youth ministry as a place where you can belong, you can build up a sense of worth, where you can develop a capacity to care for others. This community involvement, here also the word justice, but then not personal justice, but social justice, and reconciliation. And in particular, this last one, reconciliation, is really interesting. Because this is an important theme brought forward in the literature, and is also connected with justice. And two authors in particular address the theme of justice and reconciliation. And the first one is Christo Tesnar, and he envisions reconciliation as a goal of youth ministry in post-apartheid South Africa. In his view, youth ministry should help young people on their pathway towards healing and reconciliation. And then there is another author, Kobus van Wijngaard. In his view, youth ministry should help young people. He writes on post-apartheid whiteness and the challenge of youth ministry in Dutch Reformed Church, also from a South African perspective. And he shows how youth ministry directed towards healing and reconciliation is challenged by white primacy in post-apartheid South Africa. And in his view, youth ministry should strive for encounters that provide possibilities of transcending racialized categories. I purposefully put these particular examples of justice and reconciliations to the fore, because what you see is that the context here of South Africa, it really matters in what is putting forward as purposes in youth ministry. And what is true for South Africa is true for my own context here in Belgium. Me, myself, and my family, we come from the Netherlands, which is, it's really close by. It takes me a 1 hour drive by car, and then I'm in my home country. We as a family live for 2.5 years now in Belgium. And that's already a cultural shock. 100 kilometers, what do we speak about? But this context is really different from the Dutch context. And the same is true for your context in North America. and within North America, of course, particular contexts in that area. So also in terms of purposes in youth ministry, always helpful to be reminded of your own particular context. So here we see this summarizing figure again. So what is the conclusion? Well, I quoted Porter and colleagues at the beginning of the review article. And these authors say, well, it appears quickly apparent that there is no one-size-fits-all characterization of Christian maturity. So I'm really interested in what your reflections were, and if this were going in one direction or in different directions. But this was an observation of my colleagues with regard to Christian maturity. But on the basis of the literature review conducted and I presented to you, the same conclusion can be drawn with regard to the desired outcomes of youth ministry. So the figure, this one, is really helpful. It summarizes in a way. At the same time, you see a lot of angles and a lot of different pathways in this discussion on purposes. Okay, we classified this wide range of outcomes in a theoretical framework. And in this framework, 3 areas of youth ministry goals are really important to have a look at. So this area of spiritual development, personal development, and this area of social development. Then there is an additional distinction that can be made. This distinction between a direction towards individual development or communal development. So here, once again, most often I observe in the literature, but also in expressions of youth ministers, that this personal development of the individual young man or woman is at the core. Sometimes, however, they're put forward as purposes of communal development of the church and the faith community. And let me connect this with my example from the South African context. So in these kinds of contexts, reconciliation, justice are categories that are really on the level of community building, the faith community, and the church as community, and society as a community. Yeah? An apparent finding in the literature review was the observation of 2 perspectives on how the area of spiritual development relates to the areas of personal and social development. And I started with this observation at the very beginning. So then, and this is also typical in research, of course, there are a lot of follow-up research questions left. And this is, I will list these research questions, 7 or 8. I will go through them for you, also to inspire you to come along with me and with colleagues to make an effort to do research in this area. So one possible follow-up research question is, how can conceptualizations of spiritual or Christian maturity be translated into youth ministry theories, strategies, and practices? So to what extent do or should these translations differ among different phases of the lifespan? And on what theological grounds? So this is really a challenging question. Do we have other conceptions of maturity when dealing with young children? My youngest one at the moment is 4 years old. My oldest one here in my family is 14 years old. Does it depend on age? What kind of conception about maturity we have? How does it translate into practices? Second question, to what extent are visions on spiritual maturity changeable in faith communities and youth ministry contexts? And what is needed to shift facilitating spiritual development towards other directions? So probably you, while reflecting this hour, you observe a kind of, your own church community or your own youth ministry context really sticks to one direction, and probably you think, well, it might be helpful to move a little bit towards other directions. Is it possible? To what extent is that possible, that development, and what do you need to do that? Of course, another question that has to be okay, how to translate these conceptions into research instruments. Well, in this context, we, as we are together now, we can easily speak about the horizontal and the vertical dimension. Everybody, we cannot, we do not know everything, but we have a kind of an idea about what we mean with horizontal and vertical. But how can you make this properly workable in research instruments? How to instrumentalize, how to operationalize these kinds of things. And then this assessment of progress of spiritual development is also a branch in the literature. So can we do an intervention? And so like being engaged in Fuller seminary, and we do a pre-measurement, and we do a post-measurement after a couple of years, and can we assess a progress in spiritual development? Maybe a decline in spiritual development or something, I do not know. How could research designs look like that aim to conduct effective studies on the impact of youth ministry strategies on level and progress of spiritual development? Okay. Let's end up, and there is room for Q&A, but let's first take 5 to 10 minutes now, 5 to 10 minutes to have another short discussion in the same group. And then these are the questions. How does this theoretical framework challenge your ideas about spiritual maturity or Christian maturity and purposes in youth ministry? So reflect a little bit on, okay, what was this helpful? I hope it was helpful. But if it is helpful, in what way did this framework challenge you? Probably there are blank spots you observed in your own reflections. Probably you see directions never heard of or never be aware of, or other kinds of things. And then the second question has to do with how do your own experiences, whether experiences and practices of youth ministry or research experiences, how do your own experiences challenge the theoretical framework? So that's the other way around. So this is also one of the things you should do, of course. So always keep on thinking. You have your own brains. They are really helpful, your own brains. So there are moments you see these kinds of theoretical frameworks, and then you say, well, it's bullshit, and then come up with your argument. So probably that's also the case at this hour. So please have a 5 to 10 minutes moment of reflection in the small groups again. And then after that, we can go forward with all kinds of questions and a further deepening of this stuff.
Before we break, thank you for the presentation. Let's get groups and we'll take about 10 minutes and then we'll bring everybody back together.
That is true. I think there's some interesting stuff. Yeah. And one question I didn't feel like he really answered was in the beginning he set up this idea of they're different
people about like I think it's parts of us. So we have like these like 6 more physical things that,
yeah.
and then we have like all the
I just kept coming back to like,
then also like one of the things that we talk about is some people see should be able to and so like that is like the framework that we have like this doesn't support it.
Yes, correct.
I see.
Just like it.
Yeah, how to secure that.
Like, I mean,
But is it about having kids relate to perfect relationship?
oh, I tell them it's like, oh, they're.
Having-
But I human development.
That is, that's what I like. This idea that.
And that our,
Like,
and our.
here, but like.
In a way.
So I just opened it like growing.
Yeah.
God, and
Charity.
that's like, spiritual cannot be removed.
Again.
Which is like, it becomes like such a
Power.
Yeah.
you're like, you're like, your joys are connected.
And now, to be honest with you,
There's a lot of discussion.
I don't know.
That's what I was. That's the question. So how do you? Yeah, how do you?
Yes.
I'm thinking literature on spirituality.
I give you.
Every, like you were saying before, this literature, everybody has their own.
Wait, so how about the division, like, is history spiritual or just a whole?
Yeah.
What is it that?
Very monetary. I don't know how to separate. Yeah, I think you brought up this question to me, like looking at school, human history is all of human development. It's actually happening in a school that has like every other month there is goes into play, right? And then I'm gonna be just like, no, you have to have fun. Yeah, and like those that actually. And then like, what does it mean for someone to like, you know, try and get some of them, like that can't be the goal, like that, by all, you know, and you're not in like their lives, they live a whole life, you know what I mean?
Go love John.
Yeah. I love having they're getting yeah, and hopefully they're going to right. You know, so but on the flip side, separating that out harm, yeah, and keeping
Oh, yeah.
But I would argue it's hard to reach some kids. Yeah, you know, talk about my
What are some?
the practical aspects that they right now. You know, self-care is not happening.
Even though we were.
I had so
A lot of it.
yeah,
Even though we were.
it's hard to talk about like this stuff, like the reality of their human.
yeah, and that's
Right, stories of men.
yeah.
That is like
Yeah.
like all the things.
Yeah, I think it goes back to hierarchy, like, if you don't fed, you don't have
Curtis, here at the conferences I went to.
Yeah.
I realized that I was.
Yeah. Sorry. No, that's all right. I mean, well,
Like,
like, it seems like maybe it's winning.
I love her, but like, Maryland was framework.
Say, parents. Elementary, high school.
Very, very.
Be affluent.
You're in the back. I don't know. So, you know, where so like that's a very confusing thing for us. The idea that I read but as far as
Just to think of like a 5-year-old, I'm sure that an 18-year-old doesn't have that or can like then how to steer
And if you take into consideration.
I also found
like development. If you're a 85
yeah, so first of all,
or you like how do you
And I can understand.
So that's why. And then what the age impact of spiritual maturity. Is it about where you are on the journey?
All right, let's try to wrap it up and bring it back together.
I want to talk more about like, oh, yeah,
Well, and I guess the example like is.
Well, Josh, you did something. There's a lot of conversation
This?
happening here, so I'm really excited about that. Thanks again for your thoughtful presentation. Lots to chew on here, and I'd love to open it up to discussion. However you want to take it from here.
Yeah, well, I cannot see you to begin with. So there's a black.
You can't see us?
There's a black screen for me.
Oh, that's not.
So as a you.
Yeah. Discussion.
I think he's
Yeah.
Thank you. Steve, can we have it or?
Yeah, it's recorded. I don't know how to do that. Can you see us now?
Yeah, I can see you and I can hear you. Yeah.
All right, we're back. Okay, great. Thanks. I don't know what happened there. Apologies. I think it might be on our end. So, okay, So let's take it from there. How would you like to do this discussion? Should we reflect back a little bit? What did you talk about in light of Joss's questions or otherwise?
Yeah, so I would like to hear some reflection back. Yes. So what yeah,
That would be great.
yeah.
Super.
And of course, all kinds of questions are welcomed. But yeah, let's start with a little bit reflection on what did you learn?
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeremy.
So I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Are you able to hear me? Okay. So I would think that there would be a difference between the way that people see the purposes of youth ministry based on geography and through like theological background. So for example, like a country that has a more liberation theology history would see more of that social development reconciliation as part of their purposes. But what I'm wondering is if you found, looking at 25 years, if there was a growth in the way that youth ministry was seen over time in the purposes, that if in the earlier articles there was more one thing and then in later articles it switched over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the honest answer is that I cannot observe a kind of development in a certain direction when it comes to how is reflected on youth ministry goals or purposes. But what I can observe, and this has to do with the geographical dimension you mentioned, is that there are parts of the world that are not visible in these academic reflections. So I already mentioned examples from South Africa, but this is a particular area in the African continent. There are much more interesting areas in the African continent who do not have easily access to academic publications, and these voices are not heard on a regular basis in the academic debates. So even those little examples of small examples from, for example, South African context, with the context of apartheid and post-apartheid, and is really helpful to open your eyes for the context and geographical factor. So what is helpful in this regard is to, and this is for me, this is a core calling for any religious educator, is to bring up the suppressed voices. And that is also a calling for researchers in a way. There's also a kind of academic attitude to bring up suppressed voices. These voices, they are there, but they are not on the, they are under the surface level. And it is, or why this is helpful, and this has to do with theology from my perspective, because from my theological stance in life, this means that God reveals himself in all kinds of ways, and we should be as open as possible to see the tracks of God in different areas, whether geographical or theological, because that's the other thing you mentioned. There are, of course, different theological backgrounds, traditions, histories in which purposes can be rooted. And well, the same we can say about that area, theological area. It's really helpful to have this interdenominational conversation on these kinds of things, just to open our eyes for how we bound up ourselves and what great things others have to offer. Yeah. And then it's true, to come back to your question, it's true, then it's true we cannot see a development in the literature, but that this has to do with the accessibility and also the the chances for a whole for large parts in the world to be engaged in the academic debates. Yes, and so what I did in the review is showing what is there in the literature. What I didn't show is what is really there in the practices. So this is only in the literature, and if our observation of this review literature is, well, this is this is in a way a small part of the real big picture, well, then there's work to do.
Thanks. Someone else?
Hello, I'm Kelsey.
Hi.
So I noticed hello. I noticed in your presentation you used spiritual maturity throughout most of the slides, but at the end you added in Christian maturity interchangeably with it, especially in the newer research. I wonder if you've noticed a distinction between spiritual and Christian, because especially here, right, in the States, and there's religious nuns and all claim spiritual but not religious, if that makes the difference in being spiritual mature versus Christian mature.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is chaos in the literature. Yeah, it really is. So whenever you see the word spiritual, please have a look on the author, the journal, the discipline, the background, the biography of the author. So just to know, okay, what is the context where this author is coming from, and what does that mean for how she or he puts the word or concept of spirituality on the table. You know what I mean? So that's really important. But then at the same time, there's of course, we can make some distinctions. So spirituality, in the most broad sense of the word, is as I already said, is reflecting humanity in a way. You know? So it's spirituality and spiritual development has to do with human development. So then spirituality has to do with all dimensions, all anthropological dimensions of the human being. And then as a next step, we can see the word spirituality as referring to well, a way of being distinct from yourself. You know? So spirituality has to do with seeing yourself in a relationship to the context or to the big picture. You know? So spirituality then has to do with, okay, to lose yourself, to unknit yourself from yourself, to have a look on yourself, you know, from the outside, looking at yourself in connection with the world around yourself. So then it becomes more like it has to do with the domain of self-understanding. And for the self-understanding, you use sources. And then there are all kinds of sources for spirituality. And one of these sources can be a religious tradition or something, well, the transcendence dimension was the divine being as something that helps you to see what is going on if you look at yourself in relationship to the world around you. So you see that there are different boxes in which you can how spirituality is used in the literature. So then when it comes to spirituality in relationship to Christian spirituality or Christian maturity, I would say that of course, as Christians together, we can easily talk about spirituality in a kind of unreflected way, knowing that we all think about a reference to the Christian tradition and to God and the God of Christianity, etc. But whenever we enter the debate with colleagues or with young people, not being included in a Christian community, but rooted in other traditions or no tradition at all, then we should be aware of that there is still spirituality, but we cannot speak about spirituality as Christian spirituality. But in the literature, it is chaos, and this has to do with, because what is literature? It's an article in a journal is written for the audience of that particular journal, for example. So that means, and also for a book, a monograph, it's published by a publisher, and when it is published with a stock, then it's for a particular audience, which is another audience than another publisher. So it's always important to reflect a little bit on, okay, what was the audience and who was the author? And this combination really helps to grasp what would be meant with spirituality. Yeah.
Any other reflections, questions? Yeah, Dean.
I'm in your lower left corner. You can't see me, but
Okay.
yeah. As you were talking about these two approaches, especially when it came to here the spiritual development, personal development, and social development. Like approach one was that they are all sort of separate from one another, and the second you had personal and social development being sort of under the umbrella of spiritual development. I wonder if in your research you found anything about like was there any context from like I would say adults in the lives of youth, specifically parents, caregivers, people that spend more time with youth than just youth ministers, what their desires or hopes from what spiritual maturity or Christian maturity would and should be?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a good question, because so what these 50 articles I refer to, which were in the included in the review, sometimes these were articles on a theoretical and conceptual level. So there it was the author, the scholar, who expresses herself or himself, saying, well, this theoretically we might think of these kinds of purposes. But sometimes these were articles of empirical research where the results were directly related to self-reported goals from, for example, parents, or from youngsters themselves, or from teachers, or from pastors. Yeah. So it was really a mix. So what you now find in this theoretical framework is a result of a mix of input. Sometimes there are categories coming from parents and youngsters themselves. Sometimes there are categories coming from teachers and pastors. And sometimes categories come from a reflection on a theoretical level. So there's really a mix. What you can observe in the more empirical oriented research, I do not know with regard to your question. So I cannot say, so, well, there is really a difference if you have this theoretical exercise, or you do have an exercise and say, well, here is a group of parents or young people or youth ministers, and what do they say on the basis of their experiences? What I do observe is that and this is a general observation and experience. And this is not saying that this is a result of empirical research, but my particular observation experience is that youth ministers who do their job in a context which is outside the church do have this broad human development categories as purposes, much more than those youth leaders or religiously socialized parents in church communities. They formulate their purposes in a more strict sense of the word, in the spiritual domain. So there is something with being at the very heart of the church, or at the at the outskirts, or at the cutting edges of the church. So that's different, I think. But this is not a pragmatic choice only. Sometimes it's a pragmatic choice. But often I also find in the reflections, I find a theological difference in how parents or how youth ministers or how missionaries theologically think about what is the very aim of what I am doing, and what is the very aim of human development before the face of God. There are also theological differences. So these are some options as an answer to your question. Is this helpful?
Yes. Yeah, it is. And if I'd be allowed a follow-up, it would be, did you find that there were any correlations between the author, their faith tradition, their theological viewpoints in what they put more emphasis on? For instance, like, did you find that more, I would say, mainline progressive, authors, did they put more emphasis on, say, social justice as a part of, or reconciliation as a part of their priority or emphasis when it comes to these developmental boxes that we have?
No. Well, I didn't research the differences between church traditions in particular. And you can imagine that only 50 articles is on a worldwide scale. It's too less to make these kinds of observations. But and this is a good question, and it would be. This is also one of the follow-up research questions. You might research these kinds of questions, of course. But what is helpful is that my first, and this was really an observation, is that this theological dimension is really important. And the theological dimension is not linked up exclusively with church tradition. Within church traditions, you observe different theological angles. So you can imagine that this liberation theology thing, connected with integrity and justice goals, this pops up in regions and in certain societies much more than in certain church traditions. So here we can see that theology is really important and a driving force in how communities develop themselves, apart from the geography and apart from the church tradition. For this reason, I found it very helpful. At least at our faculty, we have an interdenominational faculty, and for this reason, in particular, this is important because it is very powerful for learning in a theological way. So much more than differences in church tradition, I observe differences in theology that makes different kinds of expressions of purposes.
Thank you.
Joss, I was wondering, as you looked at the literature, I'm really curious, as you think about, like, you talked a lot about sort of the intellectual and sort of the embodied experience that comes with spiritual formation. I'm wondering if the literature talks much about affect or the emotions associated with formation as well. There's some literature that talks about this idea of equanimity, the sense of feeling at peace, sense of resonance, this idea of moving from maybe fear to love or the fruit of the spirit. I don't know how that's necessarily captured, but it seems like that's a pretty significant part of the human experience, that we have the intellect and the relational, but we also have this emotional piece as well. And I'm wondering if that came up in the literature at all.
Yeah, well, it came up. And in the first place, in the literature that addressed the issue of spiritual growth, in particular, that area of literature makes these distinctions in what I call anthropological dimensions. So here really is a reflection on there's more than the cognitive dimension, but there is also this affective and emotional area, and also this embodiment. So in the area of spiritual growth, there is. But then, and that's really interesting when you see and then when you recall these categories within the area of spiritual development, and it reads faith, being in Christ, Christ-likeness, discipleship. These are theological concepts. Yeah? These are not psychological concepts. Christ-likeness, discipleship. These are theological concepts. And when you ask yourself, if you ask your colleague, but also if you ask an author of an article to say a little bit more on these theological concepts in terms of well, the dimensions you just mentioned, then what you often see is that there is a multitude of dimensions putting forward. So it is really there in the literature, in particular when it comes to spiritual development. When you observe these other two areas, then for both areas of personal and social development, you see the intellectual area. So it has to do with self-understanding, reflectiveness, these kind of things. But then there is a whole area of justice and ethics. So it's much more about morals, attitudes, and behavior. And of course, this is also stretching the thing. It's not only about reflection and cognition, it's also about action and attitudes. Yeah. But you observe a kind of difference, yes. So in these areas, it's much more about the cognitions and the attitudes. But in the area of spiritual development, then it's really broad.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think it's getting late for you, and we have so appreciated your time. And thank you for your good work. It's inspired our thinking, and we're so glad to have your paper. And I'm sure there's more questions that we're going to have after you go. But thank you so much for investing in us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And now you are frozen.
Well, we'll see you soon, huh? Can you, are we there?
Yeah, I can
no.
hear
Can you see us?
Yeah.
I'll send you a picture.
Yeah. Okay. But I just heard it was bullshit. So yeah, well, thank you for this evaluation. Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Okay, we'll see you. Yeah.
Okay, bye bye.
Yeah. Great. Steve, when was the last time you said bullshit in a lecture?
Maybe I said it with him. I don't know. I hope famous young walked by on that. That's right. Yeah. I think we're okay. As you can tell, he's a great guy. I love him, and I just love him more. Why don't we need a break? Let's take 5. I'd love to come back and just talk a little bit more about it. So let's just take 5. Come back. We'll go until maybe not more than 20-30 minutes, and then we get lunch. So
It's all out.
It's just okay. There's because it looks like it's like, oh, you obelisk in the center of the campus.
It's like trash.
Is it all right? Oh, no.